Across centuries of theological discourse and religious reflection, certain figures have stood at the center of humanity's collective understanding of good and evil. Names like Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer evoke immediate associations, be they of virtue or rebellion, light or darkness. But among these celestial archetypes lies another name, one that has largely faded from popular memory, yet whose shadow may stretch longer than we dare to admit. That name is Azazel. To most, it may sound unfamiliar, even irrelevant. Azazel is a name seldom spoken in sermons or found in common religious teachings. He does not appear with prominence in the canonized texts taught in churches or temples, and yet his existence is documented, his actions are recorded, his fall described, and his influence noted in ancient manuscripts long considered sacred by early communities of faith. It begs a question that resounds through time. Why has such a figure been hidden from view? Azazel is more than just a name buried in forgotten scrolls. He represents something larger, more unsettling, an uncomfortable truth that once stirred theological debate and spiritual reflection. He appears briefly in texts like Leviticus, is elaborated upon in the Book of Enoch, and whispered about in the traditions that orbit mainstream Judaism and Christianity. But for reasons left obscured by history, his story was stripped from the spotlight. Unlike Lucifer, whose defiance became a symbol of pride and fall, Azazel was relegated to the margins, cast away both in myth and in manuscript. What could have prompted such erasure? What danger lies in remembering a fallen angel whose acts were so profound that ancient rituals were tied to his name? Could it be that forgetting Azazel was not an accident, but a deliberate choice by religious authorities striving to shield future generations from unsettling revelations? And more importantly, if Azazel was removed from history, does that mean his influence ceased to exist? Consider this: we live in a world saturated with violence, vanity, and spiritual confusion. Empires are built on the back of warfare. Industries thrive on insecurity and image. The occult has re-emerged, not just in back alleys and secret gatherings, but in fashion, entertainment, and personal philosophy. Is it possible that an ancient figure once cast into the wilderness is still whispering across the ages? This chapter does not claim to answer all these questions. Instead, it serves as an invitation, a first step into a larger journey through forgotten texts, symbolic rituals, and spiritual mysteries. It is an opening into the enigma of Azazel, a character shrouded in divine secrecy and cultural silence. Here the curtain is drawn back, not to provoke fear, but to encourage understanding. If Azazel has indeed been erased from history, then perhaps our exploration begins not with what is said about him, but with what is not. Silence, after all, is rarely neutral. It conceals, it protects, sometimes it forgets, but often it remembers in shadows what the light has chosen to ignore. And so we begin with a name, Azazel, and the haunting truth that forgetting a fallen angel does not make him disappear. Long before the doctrines of organized religion took their present form, before creeds were written and councils convened, there existed oral traditions and sacred texts that pulsed with visions of a cosmic drama few dared to fully grasp. Among them stands the Book of Enoch, a text once revered among ancient communities, but later dismissed, buried, and lost to the sanctioned memory of much of the religious world. Within its pages lies a tale both captivating and unsettling, a narrative of divine rebellion that begins not in the depths of hell, but in the heights of heaven. According to this ancient account, there came a time when a group of heavenly beings, referred to as the Watchers, descended from their exalted domain to the realm of humankind. They were not demons in the conventional sense, nor were they symbols of mythic evil. They were angels, designed with purpose, endowed with knowledge, and entrusted with a sacred duty to observe, to guard, and to guide. But they became something else entirely when desire overtook obedience and curiosity eclipsed reverence. The descent of the Watchers was not a random fall, but a conscious decision, an act of defiance cloaked in longing. They looked upon the daughters of men and found them beautiful, and from that gaze was born the first step into corruption. Their choice to take human wives, though steeped in affection or lust, carried with it consequences beyond mortal comprehension. It was more than a violation of divine order. It was a fracture in the spiritual fabric that bound heaven and earth together. In crossing that threshold, the Watchers did not merely leave their post, they altered the course of human history. Among these celestial rebels, one figure emerges with chilling prominence. Azazel, unlike the others, was not content to merely transgress the boundary between realms. He sought to impart knowledge, secrets that had been sealed for good reason, mysteries not meant for mortal minds. He became a teacher, but not of wisdom or piety. Instead, he shared the arts of war, the crafting of weapons, and the allure of adornment. He revealed the mechanics of violence and the vanity of beauty, planting the seeds of pride and destruction in the hearts of those who received his lessons. The act of descending was not in itself a punishment. What followed, however, led to a spiritual crisis with echoes still heard today. The Book of Enoch describes the birth of the Nephilim, giants born of the union between angels and humans, beings whose existence threatened both the natural and spiritual orders. These offspring, towering in stature and insatiable in appetite, spread chaos across the earth. It was a time of darkness and distortion, a world in which power was torn from its divine source and used for domination. Azazel's role in this celestial insurrection was not passive. He did not simply follow others into error, he actively guided the descent into chaos. His instruction gave the Watchers and their children the tools to shape the earth in their own image, to imitate the creative power of the divine without the sanctity that should accompany it. This act alone transforms him from a mere participant into a symbol, one who represents the peril of unchecked knowledge, the danger of enlightenment pursued without restraint or humility. The theological implications of this narrative are vast. It suggests that evil is not always born of malice, but can emerge from desire, from ambition, from the misuse of what was once good. The Watchers were not created to be enemies of the divine. Their fall was not predestined. It was the result of a series of choices, each one moving them further from the light. And Azazel stood at the center of that movement, not merely as a fallen being, but as an architect of transgression. To many early believers, these stories explained more than just a distant myth. They offered insight into the nature of temptation, the origins of corruption, and the reason for the suffering that had come to define human life. This was not merely a fable, it was a warning, a reminder that rebellion often begins with fascination, that the divine order is delicate, and that spiritual authority can be undermined when heavenly knowledge is treated like a toy rather than a trust. And yet, despite the gravity of their fall, the Watchers did not immediately vanish from influence. Their teachings, their offspring, and their legacy would linger far beyond their own lifetimes. Theirs was a rebellion that shaped civilization itself, a silent foundation beneath the visible world, and in the heart of that rebellion, Azazel remains, still whispering, still remembered, even in absence. Among all the Watchers who descended, it was Azazel who emerged not only as a rebel, but as a mentor, one who offered more than forbidden affection. He brought gifts, not of gold or shelter, but of knowledge, potent and dazzling, wrapped in the language of progress and promise. He did not come bearing chaos in appearance. His influence arrived in the form of insight, of enlightenment, of arcane sciences that held the potential to elevate mankind or to fracture its soul. Azazel's teachings were not random, nor were they offered without calculation. He introduced the art of crafting weapons, Swords, daggers, shields, and breastplates. These were more than tools of defense. They were implements of control and conquest, shifting the balance of power from divine justice to human ambition. Before this intervention, violence existed in its primal form, but Azazel gave it structure, intention, and precision. He turned survival into warfare, and in doing so transformed conflict into a craft. With every forged blade, the seed of domination was planted deeper into the soil of human nature. Yet the reach of his influence did not end on the battlefield. Azazel revealed to women the use of cosmetics, the enhancement of beauty through adornment and alteration. At first glance, this might seem benign, even empowering, but the knowledge came not with reverence for inner worth, but with the implication that appearance was the truest source of value. Vanity, once a whisper in the human heart, was now given a mirror and a palette. With painted faces and braided hair, individuals began to shape their image, not in reflection of the divine, but in pursuit of desire, attention, and elevation above others. The human body, once sacred, became a canvas for illusion and comparison. In parallel, Azazel unveiled mysteries of sorcery and enchantment, forms of spiritual manipulation masked as wisdom. He showed mortals how to summon, to bind, to control the unseen. Magic, long held as a divine domain, became accessible, or so it seemed. What he offered was not communion with the sacred, but interference with it. Those who practiced these arts believed themselves empowered, yet they drifted further from the source of true power. The lines between sacred and profane blurred, and soon many no longer knew which voice they were answering when they prayed. There is a seductive quality in knowledge, particularly when it promises power, beauty, or transformation. Azazel understood this deeply. He knew that humans, made in the image of the divine, possessed within them a longing for greatness, a desire to rise above limitation. But instead of directing that longing upward, he redirected it inward and outward, towards self-glorification and the manipulation of others. His teachings whispered a lie disguised as freedom, that humanity could become godlike, not through humility or obedience, but through domination, spectacle, and control. The fallout of this instruction was profound. Societies began to organize not around sacred law, but around strength and splendor. The mighty ruled not by wisdom, but by fear. Beauty became currency, and sorcery a weapon. What was once community dissolved into hierarchy, each person vying for position, for influence, for the upper hand in a world now shaped by knowledge, too heavy for untempered hearts to bear. And behind it all loomed the figure of Azazel, the teacher who had offered these gifts freely, knowing full well the cost they would incur. It is tempting to view this chapter of ancient history as myth, as a distant echo from a world too far removed to matter. Yet even today, the echoes of Azazel's instruction are visible, in the obsession with physical appearance, in the glorification of violence, in the commodification of mystery, and the hunger for secret knowledge. We live in a world still shaped by these teachings, where what was once esoteric has become entertainment, and what was once sacred is now leveraged for power and prestige. Azazel did not raise armies or build empires. He taught, and in his teaching, he planted ideologies that would outlast him by millennia. The consequences of his instruction live not only in historical memory, but in cultural fabric, in the narratives we tell, the industries we build, and the identities we construct. His knowledge did not liberate, it seduced, and in that seduction, it poisoned. Buried within the priestly instructions of Leviticus lies a ritual of striking symbolism and spiritual depth, a moment in the calendar of ancient Israel that spoke not only of forgiveness, but of profound separation. Known as the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, this sacred observance represented the culmination of repentance, a time when the sins of a people were confronted and their relationship with the divine recalibrated. Yet within this solemn tradition exists a mystery, an unsettling anomaly in the form of a figure not fully explained, yet undeniably significant. Amid offerings, incense, and sacred blood, one name stands apart: Azazel. Leviticus 16 outlines a procedure in which 2 goats were brought before the high priest. One was designated as a sin offering to the Lord, its blood sprinkled in the Holy of Holies to cleanse the sanctuary from the defilement caused by the iniquities of the people. The second goat, however, was not sacrificed in the usual sense. It was not offered upon the altar, nor was its blood poured out. Instead, this goat was marked for Azazel. Upon its head, the high priest laid his hands and confessed over it all the sins, rebellions, and transgressions of Israel, symbolically transferring the weight of communal guilt onto this single, living creature. Then it was led away, not into another sacred chamber, but into the desolation of the wilderness, a space untamed, uninhabited, and unholy. The text offers no explanation for the identity of Azazel. It does not describe him, categorize him, or contextualize his role, and yet the ritual is clear. This goat was not sent to God, nor was it left to wander by chance. It was directed to Azazel. The act suggests intention, a movement toward a spiritual being or principle that existed in contrast to holiness, a figure who did not receive offerings but bore the residue of sin. Scholars and theologians across centuries have debated this rite, some interpreting Azazel as a location, others as a demon, and still others as a metaphor for the total removal of guilt. But regardless of the interpretation, the association is unmistakable. Azazel becomes the destination of impurity, the vessel of estrangement, the one who receives what must be exiled. This ritual did more than enact atonement. It dramatized it. It made visible the invisible burden of sin and highlighted the spiritual cost of transgression. In sending the goat into the wilderness, the people witnessed their failings being removed, carried away into a domain beyond their reach. But the wilderness was not a vacuum. It was a space already symbolically occupied. By naming Azazel as the recipient, the ritual suggested that there exists a realm or force that thrives on separation from God, a spiritual geography where the cast-off weight of moral failure finds a resting place. Azazel's connection to this rite shifts his identity from a historical corrupter to a symbolic adversary. He is no longer simply the one who taught war and vanity. He becomes the one to whom sin is given. In a theological sense, this is not honor, but indictment. He is not offered the goat in reverence, but as a disposal. He becomes synonymous with exile itself, with the spiritual contamination that must be banished if holiness is to be preserved. His role in this rite is silent, passive, but ominous. He receives, not in power, but as a kind of receptacle for what must be removed. This transformation is telling. While earlier traditions framed Azazel as an active force of corruption, Leviticus situates him within the religious system as a figure who now inhabits the margins. He is not eradicated, nor is he confronted. He is bypassed. He remains, waiting in the wilderness, a constant presence beyond the boundaries of the sacred, ready to absorb what cannot be sanctified. The goat, laden with sin, is not destroyed but exiled, and in that exile it enters Azazel's dominion. The wilderness itself holds layered meaning within the Hebrew imagination. It is both a place of testing and a place of absence, a setting where the voice of God can speak clearly, but also where the idols of fear and doubt often rise. By associating Azazel with the wilderness, the ritual affirms his position as the embodiment of separation, the one who dwells where holiness cannot. He is not a god to be worshipped, but a symbol of what must be discarded. And yet, in receiving the sins of the people, he becomes integral to the process of their purification. What this reveals is a profound spiritual insight. Atonement does not merely involve forgiveness, it demands removal. Holiness requires not only the covering of sin through sacrifice, but its relocation, its banishment from the community and the sanctuary. Azazel represents the reality that not all burdens can be transformed. Some must be exiled, and in their exile they remain part of a spiritual tension that the world cannot resolve. The sins do not vanish, they are sent away, and in that sending they find a strange kind of permanence. This chapter in Azazel's story is perhaps the most haunting. He becomes not just a corrupter of the past, but a figure who continues to receive the echoes of human failure. The scapegoat tradition reminds us that there is always something or someone waiting at the edge of sanctity, ready to collect what the sacred cannot contain. Azazel is the name we give to that space, that mystery, that shadow to which we send what we cannot cleanse. The silence that surrounds Azazel in modern religious discourse is not accidental. It is not the byproduct of theological irrelevance or textual obscurity. It is the result of a deliberate and methodical erasure, one orchestrated through generations of canon formation, interpretative control, and institutional power. What remains today is not the absence of Azazel's influence, but the absence of his name, scrubbed from the sacred stage, not because he lacked significance, but because he carried too much of it. Early religious communities were not monolithic. Before orthodoxy was cemented, there existed a vibrant diversity of belief, text, and interpretation. The Book of Enoch, which presents Azazel in vivid detail, was once held in high regard by many Jewish sects and is even quoted in the New Testament's Epistle of Jude. It formed part of the spiritual vocabulary of groups who were wrestling with profound questions about sin, angels, divine justice, and human suffering. Azazel, as depicted in Enoch, served as a theological anchor for understanding the origin of corruption, not through a single human act, but through celestial betrayal. He was a rebel, not against man, but against divine law itself, a being whose actions carried cosmological weight. But with the passage of time, religious authorities began to narrow the borders of what could be considered sacred. The process of canonization, both in Judaism and Christianity, sought to stabilize doctrine and consolidate power. In doing so, texts that complicated the narrative, texts that introduced figures like Azazel, were pushed aside. The Book of Enoch was declared non-canonical in Jewish tradition and relegated to the fringes in Christian theology, retained only in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and a few isolated circles. Azazel, whose name and role loomed large in these texts, was cast into obscurity alongside them. The reasons for this excision were not solely theological. They were political, practical, and deeply strategic. A figure like Azazel disrupts simplicity. He introduces layers of moral complexity and cosmic drama that defy easy explanation. His story does not resolve neatly, nor does it lend itself to the clean dichotomies of good versus evil that many religious institutions sought to uphold. Including him fully would require grappling with uncomfortable truths, that spiritual corruption may originate in the heavens, that divine beings may fail, and that the struggle between purity and defilement is not confined to human hearts alone. For those crafting a coherent and authoritative religious structure, such ambiguities were liabilities. Moreover, Azazel's narrative threatens the centrality of human sin as the sole explanation for the world's brokenness. By shifting part of the blame to celestial rebellion, the theological spotlight moves away from Adam, from the garden, and from human disobedience. It invites a broader, more disturbing vision in which humanity is not merely fallen by choice, but corrupted by exposure, taught rebellion by beings once entrusted with guidance. This undermines certain theological formulations of guilt and redemption, and challenges the frameworks upon which many doctrines were built. Yet, despite his removal from canon, Azazel was not forgotten. His presence endured in apocryphal literature, in rabbinic writings, and in the shadowed corners of theological memory. Early mystics, commentators, and scribes continued to reference him, sometimes cautiously, other times defiantly. They preserved his story not only as a relic of the past, but as a counter-narrative, a reminder that official doctrine does not always hold the entire truth. In some mystical traditions, Azazel was not merely a villain, but a symbol of exile, of unwanted truth, of the spiritual residue that organized religion could not wash away. He became a cipher for everything that did not fit, the unclean, the unexplained, the uncomfortable. The scapegoat ritual itself, which continued to be practiced long after his name had vanished from public liturgy, remained a silent testament to his place in the sacred economy. Even when his name was no longer spoken, his function endured. There is a cost to such erasure, one that stretches beyond scholarly concern. When a figure like Azazel is removed from spiritual consciousness, so too is the ability to fully understand the scope of human and cosmic brokenness. Without him, we are left with an incomplete narrative, one that explains sin, but not its seduction, one that acknowledges evil, but not its instruction. The theological landscape becomes less messy, but also less honest. Erasing Azazel did not remove his influence. It only drove it underground. His legacy continues to surface, not only in texts, but in the shape of human obsessions, in the spiritual tensions that traditional frameworks struggle to resolve. He is there, in the unspoken corners of doctrine, in the rituals that remember more than they admit, and in the persistent discomfort that not everything has been explained. Though centuries have passed since his name faded from the sanctioned scriptures, the presence of Azazel has not vanished. It has only changed form. What was once openly taught beneath the watchful eyes of heaven now moves subtly through the undercurrents of modern culture, cloaked in new language, masked by innovation, and rebranded as progress. The ancient darkness he introduced does not appear today with the thunder of fallen angels or the towering shadows of Nephilim. Instead, it whispers through the architecture of desire, the rituals of self-image, and the technologies of control. In today's world, where information is currency and image is power, one can trace an uncanny resonance with the lessons Azazel first offered to humankind. His teachings were not haphazard, they were precise. He taught weaponry, and now we live in an age where the arms race is no longer fought only in fields or deserts, but in the corridors of cyberspace, in laboratories, and even within financial markets. Power has evolved, but its essence remains rooted in dominance, surveillance, and the capacity to destroy from a distance. The instruments are different, but the spirit behind them, the desire to rise above others by force, remains disturbingly familiar. The world of fashion and beauty, too, bears the fingerprints of Azazel's ancient influence. He revealed the art of adornment, once a mystery reserved for celestial beings, and turned it into a commodity. What began as the application of color and ornament to accentuate form has blossomed into a global obsession with perfection, modification, and the curated self. Billions are spent each year in pursuit of an image that satisfies not the soul, but the appetite of the gaze. Filters, surgeries, cosmetics, and styles now dictate identity, and many measure their worth not by virtue, but by visibility. The mirror, once a reflective surface, has become a judge. It would be too simple to blame the tools themselves. Knowledge in isolation is neutral. But as with the ancient days, it is the context and the intention that determine its effect. Azazel did not invent beauty, but he taught how to manipulate it. He did not forge war, but he revealed how to refine its craft. And this is the crux of his enduring echo. His influence teaches that power is to be harnessed, that beauty is to be weaponized, and that knowledge is to be used as leverage, not wisdom. Modern entertainment often serves as a stage for this ancient script. Films, television, music, and literature regularly flirt with the occult, drawing symbols from forbidden texts, glamorizing rebellion, and presenting darkness as edgy, liberating, or even romantic. Stories of angels and demons, of forbidden knowledge and spiritual awakening, now circulate not as warnings, but as fantasies. What was once feared has become marketable. The mystical has become aesthetic, and behind the stylized narratives lies a profound spiritual confusion, one in which sacred truths are blurred and ancient transgressions are repackaged as enlightenment. The resurgence of occult practices in mainstream culture also demands reflection. Tarot, astrology, spirit conjuring, and ritual magic have moved from the margins into the center of modern spiritual exploration. While many pursue these practices in search of meaning or healing, the foundation often remains the same: an attempt to access hidden power apart from divine authority. This too traces back to Azazel's initial offer: insight without obedience, wisdom without reverence. It is the pursuit of the divine by bypassing the sacred. Psychologically, his legacy unfolds in the ever-deepening entanglement between self-worth and external validation. Social media, with its ceaseless stream of curated lives and manufactured images, operates as a temple to the self, where attention is sacrifice and affirmation the sacrament. The algorithm, like an unseen priest, distributes favor according to visibility, beauty, and controversy. In this system, the old teachings breathe again: vanity over virtue, spectacle over sincerity, sensation over substance. None of this suggests that modern society is doomed or that every advancement is rooted in corruption. But it does illuminate a sobering truth. The patterns Azazel introduced have not vanished. They have evolved. They adapt to every generation, finding new expressions, embedding themselves in new technologies, disguising themselves in the rhetoric of freedom, creativity, and progress. What appears innovative may be ancestral. What feels liberating may, in fact, be echoing a bondage that began before the first cities were built. Azazel's presence today is not one of overt manifestation, but of influence. Deep, structural, often unnoticed. He does not need to walk among us to speak. His voice is etched into the systems we create, the choices we celebrate, and the values we elevate. His legacy is not in visible idols, but in invisible ideologies. To recognize these echoes is not to retreat into fear, but to awaken to clarity. It is to see that the spiritual battle is not confined to ancient texts or theological debates. It lives in our screens, our desires, our decisions. The masks may change, but the voice behind them remains hauntingly consistent. Throughout human history, the dual edge of knowledge has cut through civilizations with both brilliance and devastation. It has built wonders and weaponry, inspired beauty and brutality, opened pathways to the divine, and carved roads into the abyss. At the heart of this paradox stands the question that now confronts us. Can the knowledge and power, once corrupted by celestial rebellion, be redeemed by human humility? Or are we condemned to replicate the fall of our earliest instructors? Azazel's legacy, though dark, was built upon truths. The crafting of metals, the shaping of beauty, the manipulation of the unseen, all these are not inherently evil. They are, in essence, reflections of the divine capacity within creation, echoes of a universe designed with layers of mystery and mastery. The problem was never the knowledge itself, but the manner in which it was given, and more importantly, the spirit in which it was received. The teachings were delivered without sanctity, without context, without the reverence that guards wisdom from becoming tyranny. The question of redemption lies not in reversing time, but in transforming trajectory. What Azazel offered was power disconnected from purpose. But when power is reconnected to its rightful source, when knowledge is wielded with restraint, gratitude, and moral clarity, it no longer serves corruption. It becomes a tool for healing, for restoration, for progress that honors rather than defies the sacred. Scripture offers numerous precedents for such transformation. The very instruments of bondage in Egypt, once redeemed, became symbols of deliverance. The bronze serpent, a reminder of suffering in the wilderness, was lifted up as a symbol of healing. Joseph, sold into slavery through betrayal, rose to a position where he could preserve life. These stories reveal a divine pattern. What is misused can be reclaimed. What begins as harm can be bent through grace and wisdom into hope. Still, this transformation is not automatic. It demands discernment, discipline, and the courage to confront the seductive allure of autonomy. The essence of Azazel's deception was not simply in what he taught, but in the temptation to become as gods without God. It was an invitation to grasp divinity without submitting to it, to possess sacred insight without bearing sacred responsibility. That temptation remains alive in every generation, woven into the fabric of human ambition. We now live in an age that offers more knowledge in a moment than many civilizations could accumulate in centuries. Technology opens doors to previously unimaginable power. Medicine, communication, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering stretch the limits of what it means to be human. Yet the question remains unchanged. Will we use these tools to uplift or to dominate, to restore dignity or to inflate ego? In our hands is the potential for a second fall or a slow, steady redemption. It would be too simplistic to say that we can erase Azazel's influence by merely choosing to be good. The transformation of corrupted knowledge requires more than moral willpower. It demands a return to the principles that once defined wisdom itself: humility before truth, reverence for life, and obedience not to systems of power, but to the sacred rhythms of creation. Redemption is not a denial of what came before. It is the painstaking process of reclaiming it with clean hands and a clear heart. The burden is personal. Each individual becomes a steward of their own influence, a vessel either of healing or harm. The ancient figure of Azazel looms not as a ghost of the past, but as a mirror held up to the present. His legacy challenges every human soul to ask, what am I doing with what I have been given? Am I building or breaking, healing or haunting, serving truth or seducing power? It is not enough to condemn the past, nor is it wise to idealize a future without confronting the cost of transformation. The path toward redemption must be walked with both eyes open, one on the lessons of ancient failures, the other on the vision of what might yet be. In this way, Azazel becomes not just a cautionary tale, but a catalyst. His story, once buried, can serve as a turning point, not by embracing his defiance, but by redeeming the knowledge he once twisted. The power that corrupted can become the power that creates. The wisdom that enslaved can be reshaped to liberate. But only if we remember that knowledge without humility is still a curse, and power without purpose is still a wound. Azazel's shadow does not determine our destiny. It merely defines the path we must walk with vigilance. As we come to the threshold of this journey, one question looms with greater weight than all others. Where is Azazel now? Has he faded into mere allegory, a relic of ancient imaginations, a cautionary symbol etched into the past with no present force? Or does he remain, unseen but active, his influence still threading through the spiritual architecture of the world, hidden in wildernesses not marked by geography but by condition, places of exile, confusion, and shadow? The answer is neither simple nor easily discerned, for Azazel is no longer a figure who occupies a visible role in mainstream theology. His name does not echo from pulpits or populate children's stories. He does not reside in the public liturgies of worship or doctrine. And yet, in that very absence, there exists a strange kind of presence. Azazel's erasure has not extinguished his relevance. It has, in many ways, deepened his mystery. He remains unnamed in places where his fingerprints are all too visible, places where separation from the sacred thrives, where knowledge is severed from conscience, and where power operates without mercy or memory. There are those who argue that Azazel, like many ancient figures, has been absorbed into symbolic language. In this view, he represents the spiritual wilderness itself, the domain into which we cast our failures, the haunting terrain where our unresolved sins roam unburied and unchecked. This wilderness is not located on a map, but in the recesses of the human soul, in systems that refuse grace, in ideologies built on domination rather than service. When we exile what we cannot redeem, when we refuse to confront the dark consequences of our choices, we send those burdens into that same wilderness. And whether or not Azazel waits there in form, he certainly does in function. Yet symbolism alone cannot fully capture the weight of his legacy. Too many echoes remain, too many patterns persist with uncanny continuity. The knowledge he shared, the seductions he inspired, and the structures he helped build continue to shape human experience. And where there is enduring influence, there is enduring presence, if not in the material world, then in the metaphysical currents that move beneath it. It would be naive to believe that a figure so deeply woven into the early tapestry of cosmic rebellion would simply dissipate into metaphor. There is also the matter of spiritual warfare, a theme too often domesticated in modern discourse. In truth, the conflict between light and darkness has never been abstract. It unfolds daily in decisions, in temptations, in systems of oppression and movements of resistance. It is a war not of flesh and blood, but of principalities and powers, of unseen forces that influence the scene. And in that context, Azazel represents more than history. He embodies a still relevant force of separation. Where the divine seeks communion, he invites exile. Where truth demands confrontation, he offers concealment. Where grace calls for transformation, he whispers comfort in remaining unchanged. This is why remembering Azazel matters. Not to glorify him, not to fear him unnecessarily, but to name what often goes unnamed. His story, buried by religious authorities and lost to public consciousness, still speaks to the patterns we repeat and the struggles we face. By resurrecting his narrative, we do not awaken a forgotten demon. We awaken ourselves to the parts of our world and our hearts that still resonate with his original defiance. And yet, within this haunting truth lies a thread of hope. The wilderness is not merely a place of banishment, it is also a place where encounters with the divine have occurred. Prophets were shaped there, revelation was received there. Even Christ, before beginning his ministry, was led into the wilderness to confront the adversary and to emerge with clarity. If Azazel dwells in the wilderness, he is not alone, and he is not beyond the reach of divine justice or human awakening. The endurance of truth is not threatened by shadows. It is tested by them, refined through them, and ultimately revealed as enduring precisely because it survives them. Azazel may continue to exert influence, but he does not own the future. He may linger at the margins, but he cannot erase what has been reclaimed by light. Every generation must wrestle with what it has inherited, with the knowledge it wields, and with the voices it listens to. But within that struggle lies the opportunity to choose, to step out of the wilderness and into the clarity that only confrontation brings. In the end, the question is not only where Azazel is now, but where we are. Whether we continue to live in exile from the sacred, or whether we begin the long, deliberate walk back toward the center of the divine design. His story was buried, but it was never lost, and in unearthing it we are reminded that even in the silence, truth still speaks. If this message has moved you, challenged you, or inspired you, I invite you to take a moment to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you join a growing community dedicated to deeper understanding, reflection, and spiritual growth. Be sure to like this video so that its message can reach more people. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts, your questions, or your personal reflections. Your voice matters, and your insight can inspire others. And most importantly, share this video with someone close to you. A friend, a family member, or anyone you feel may benefit from hearing these truths. Together, we uncover what history tried to bury. Together, we remember what was almost forgotten. And together, we walk not in fear of the wilderness, but in search of the truth that still shines beyond it. Thank you for watching. May your path be guided by wisdom, and may your heart stay anchored in light.